want to make it as authentic as possible, so I don't really edit. I just have it as it is, like literally just like a normal conversation. So if that's okay with you, that's how I'm gonna go ahead with the recording, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. Sorry, let me just get my questions up. So I've got my phone near me. Perfect. Right. So firstly, thank you for actually taking the time to speak to me and have this webinar, do this webinar series with us. The reason why we're actually doing these is because I want to create conversation around disability within the workplace. I want to create conversations where our candidates can connect with it and interact with it, because I don't feel like there's many conversations about these going around when it comes to workplace culture and work influence and work just work life in general for these types of candidates. And with your experience and your expertise, you deal with more of the law and legal side of disability within the workplace, and I feel like that's there's a lot of interesting topics we can kind of tap into, more at the legality side of things and the law side of things, which are completely different to the conversations I've had as of now. So I just want to kind of like jump straight into it. So before I ask any questions, could you give me like a little bit of a brief overview of your job, your experience, your work expertise, and then we'll jump into the questions.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure. So I'm Yasmin. I'm the founder of Diverse Matters, which is essentially a training consultancy helping organisations become more confident and competent dealing with disability-related issues in the workplace. I founded the organisation about 12 or 13 years ago now, really as a result of my experience. I was a lawyer before in the city, and then I sustained a spinal cord injury back in 2008, which completely changed the way I looked at the world. And I'm a full-time wheelchair user now. So when I went back into law, I just could see there was a big gap about not having these conversations. People weren't normalising the conversation around disability and inclusion in the workplace. So after several years of working in the law, I set up Diverse Matters and have gone from there, combining really legal expertise, lived experience, practical experience, and trying to change workplace culture, getting more comfortable talking around disability-related issues.
That's great. I mean, obviously, the fact that you're actually bringing that to light, and the fact that, like I said, because we haven't actually had these conversations, we've had conversations about disability and people with experiences with disability, but the fact that there's people such as yourself who are actually out there doing what you do, because it's more, like I said, it's more the legalities and the law side of things, which I didn't even, that for me, as someone who would be just a regular worker, I didn't even think that was a thing when it comes to work and workplace culture. And I think it's like really important to highlight that, because for someone like me who doesn't know that there are things like that out in the world, it's interesting to have these kind of conversations. So what would you say are some of the biggest mistakes employers make when handling conversations around disability or reasonable adjustments? Because obviously you deal with like talking to employers and like discussing these, so what mistakes do you find that they make when you have these conversations with them?
So I think one important thing to say is that a lot of employers may not really understand what disability is, or even the employee themselves. You know, they might see it as just a visible disability, and actually the majority of disability is not visible. Between 70 and 80% of disability is not visible. So it could be chronic fatigue, anxiety, arthritis, diabetes. So that's a myth I have to bust first of all. What is disability? And lots of employers tend to be very well-intentioned, but they're very reactive. They'll wait until someone declares they have a disability, or to say, I've got a challenge with this, and can we speak about adjustments, or I'm struggling with something. they're very reactive, they're not proactive. And my training helps people normalize like those kind of conversations, not waiting until someone has an issue or a problem or a challenge, but actually how do you embed that into workplace culture? So yeah, what is a disability, and then waiting until, not till it's too late, but until there's a problem, and not learning how to be proactive rather than reactive. And not realizing, some managers may not realize that actually they have a legal duty. So the law says, certainly in the UK, if you know or reasonably can be expected to know that someone is disabled, whether it's a visible or non-visible disability, you need to go in and have a conversation about reasonable adjustments. You do have some legal responsibility. So it's helping people understand that, you know, don't wait until it's too late, until there's become a problem, but actually going in and setting the tone on what that workplace culture should be like, you know, building in that inclusion from the outset.
Of course, because it's just, you know, the idea that I feel like when people like you kind of tapped onto something when people talk about disability, I think they just mainly talk about like physical disability. No one actually, like, not all disabilities are you can see, they're not, you can't see all disabilities, and it's not really, I feel like, again, it's not intentional, but when employers, I feel the minute they hear that you do have a disability, it's kind of like, oh, alarm bells go off, and it's okay, well, how is this going to work, how are you going to implement, how is it going to be implemented into work, when that shouldn't, with someone who hasn't got a disability, that wouldn't even be a second thought. So so it's just like, it's just, if you kind of just tapped into something there, which I thought worth mentioning.
There's a lot of fear around disability. You know, you're right. A lot of people may go to, what do I need to do? How is this going to be a problem for me as a manager? You know, and there's a lot of fear, and actually it involves delicate conversations sometimes with that individual. Certainly.
Well, from that then, how would you say, or how can managers approach conversations around disability more confidently and safely without fear of saying the wrong thing?
Yeah. This is a very real fear that managers have. They might think, well, am I going to offend the person? Am I going to single that person out by mentioning they have a disability? Worrying about language, that's a big one. About the language, is it non-inclusive? So there's a lot of fear, and often managers may not say anything because these fears are very real in their head. I always advise saying, when I do my trainings, I always say we've got a clumsiness agreement in place, which essentially means, you've got permission to be clumsy. So please feel free to speak. You might not always have the right words, but it's better to have the conversation and be imperfect rather than thinking I have to be perfect in order to have that conversation. So I always say, well, have your own clumsiness agreement. Say to people, as a manager, you could say, look, I don't know everything about your situation, and I may not always get it right, but if I get it wrong, whether it's words or whether it's behavior, but if I'm not fully inclusive, could you let me know? Because I really would appreciate that feedback as a manager to improve. And, that sort of deals with the elephant in the room. So maybe have your own version of the clumsiness agreement.
I didn't even know that was a thing. I think, sorry, again, you just kind of like tapped into something. I think when it comes to these kinds of I mean, even me, and I'm not a manager, I don't have employees under me, but the fact that when you do have these conversations, I do sit there and I think, oh my God, like, what is the right thing to say? What do I say where it's not coming across as offensive? Because you don't want to offend anyone. I didn't even know that was a thing. So I thought, thank you for bringing that to light, because I think the idea of offending someone, I could never, and I don't want to, but it's just you don't know what to say or what the right words are or what the right language is, where it's like, have I just said something that's offensive? Is that allowed to be said? Should I have said that, or was there another way of saying that? I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And the second thing I'd say is that managers don't need to know everything about the person's disability. So, if you do know what someone's disability is, the manager may feel, gosh, I've got to almost be like a doctor now. I need to know exactly how this impacts someone, everything. And actually, that's not true. You could have two people with exactly the same condition or diagnosis. dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, they're going to be impacted very differently.
Yeah.
What you need to understand is really understanding from the individual through conversations with them, how does this impact you? What are the barriers that are affecting you? What's getting in the way? And then good conversations, really start with that curiosity and collaboration. So asking questions, what would help you work most effectively? Are there any barriers that we can reduce? What support works well for you? So really having a clear idea of what's getting in the way, not really, necessarily knowing everything about that person's medical condition, because then it feels very medical rather than actually understanding the human impact, what's in the way, what are the barriers, and then having that conversation with people about adjustments that could help reduce or remove those barriers.
Okay, all right, cool. So it's like, is it kind of like making it more of a, it's kind of like creating an environment where it's not, it just feels like it's just employee and manager. It's not so much, oh, manager and I've got a disabled employer or employee, and I have to know the ins and outs of their medical history, understand this,
No.
understand that. It's not. It's
That's
about,
not the manager's role at all.
no.
And I think that is a genuine fear, that managers feel they have to know everything about that condition, but they don't need to. They just need to understand, well, how does this impact this individual? What tasks are they finding more challenging in this role? What
Yeah.
are the barriers? Really understanding that and having a conversation with that individual about what those
I think
barriers
as
are.
well, giving that leniency as well, where it's just like, okay, there are things that we have to put in place to accommodate to our employee, where they are able to do the job role, because
Yeah.
obviously with circumstances they're not able to do or be able to. I can't expect the same work. It's not so much work performance, but it's more of, there are things that need to be put in place where they need to accommodate for these kinds of people. So it's like, okay, like, because I really touched on this before when we had our last conversation, the idea of remote work. The whole point of remote work is for people who physically can't leave their houses to go to work a 9 to 5, because if someone is in a wheelchair, or if someone is neurodivergent, or if someone suffers with anxiety or has a chronic illness where they're constantly in and out of appointments, things like that. One simple thing, and this is just one thing that I mentioned, purely just remote work on its own fixes about 4 or 5 different problems for one person, just purely giving them the ability to say, listen, you don't actually have to come into work to do your job. You can still do your job, just do it at home. And then that gives them that flexibility, that gives them a sense of a regime, it gives them a schedule, it gives them something to work with, but then it also gives them normality, because they're still being treated as an employee just like everyone else. It's just that one adjustment for them makes the world of difference, and it improves performance, it improves I feel like if that was me, I thought that would improve some sort of stability in my life, because I can work on a regime, I can work on a schedule, I can figure out how I can balance between work life, personal life, all because of one adjustment that's been made. So if that's one adjustment, imagine all the other adjustments that can be, and they are just small adjustments that do make a big impact for these kinds of people. So
and what you said really is rings true, Nikki, that often it's the workplace built environment that is disabling for an individual. Or quite often we look at it the other way around, saying, well, what is wrong? I put this in inverted commas, what is wrong with the person, rather than actually, is there something wrong with the structure, with the workplace, that could be less disabling and more enabling for that individual? And what you said about remote working is true, because there's research to back this up. I was the vice chair of the Disabled Solicitors Network at the Law Society, because in my former life I was a lawyer, so I was doing a lot of work with the Law Society. We did some research called Legally Disabled, where we interviewed about 300 legal professionals, all of them had a disability. What we found in the research is that working pre-COVID, the most requested and refused reasonable adjustment was home working and flexible working. Now we have a pandemic and this has become a mainstream concern. And for over 70% of the people interviewed in that survey, they said working from home or working in a more flexible way has been truly liberating, because you don't have to navigate an inaccessible transport system. You know, I'm in a wheelchair, and when I was injured and I went back to work and I realised, gosh, the underground system was not really designed for someone like me in mind. I never gave that a second thought. How would people with a mobility issue navigate and travel in their own city? Never thought about it. That's even before you've got to work, you know, thinking of those things, how you would get there. So really, that remote working or hybrid working has been really transformative for disabled people, enabling them to manage perhaps pain or fatigue or perhaps hospital appointments, and not be wedded to this Monday to Friday 9 to 5.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
I think as well, I think even with that, I mean, I think this just goes out as like a general thing as well, not even just towards disabled candidates. The idea of remote work, if we're being completely transparent, like we said, it only really came about during the pandemic, and remote work wasn't even given a second. Remote work wasn't even considered. The idea of like you having to go to work meant you had to get up and go to a physical office, go to a job, go to wherever, do your job, do your hours, then come home. And then obviously the pandemic happened, people had no choice but to work from home. And this just goes towards everyone. It became a thing of, well, I've been doing the same job, but I've been doing it at home. So why would once the pandemic was over, why would I then go back to doing what I was doing before, when I can easily do what I was doing just at home from the comfort of my own home, and it's convenient. So with that being said, it would make more sense for the people who physically can't, because of whatever reason, they physically can't leave their houses or actually travel to work or have the ability to actually, like you said, travel on the underground, do all these things. Give them the remote work, because they're the ones that actually do need it and would benefit from it, because that is tailored to them. It wouldn't be tailored for someone like me, or it would just be, I could easily go in and out of work and travel, but for someone who can't, it makes more sense to give them the remote work. And I feel like that's not, I don't see why employers don't actually implement that more. And I think as well, I feel like employers think that, when you work from home, it's performance goes down. They want work activity to improve. But I feel like, if anything, work activity improves because there's less stimulation. And
I can see an employer's point of view, to play devil's advocate. You know, it is harder sometimes to manage people who are at home. You've got to, you know, consciously check in with people in terms of, and also for junior members of staff, you know, quite often, you know, when I was a trainee solicitor, I went into the office every day. I would learn through osmosis. I would observe what my supervisor partner was doing, how she interacted on the phone, how she liaised with clients. And I wouldn't get that if I was at home. But working from home could be a reasonable adjustment. Back then, I was able to travel into the office. I didn't have a disability then. So I can see there is an additional challenge for a manager to manage someone who is remote. But actually, if that enables them to be productive and effective by working from home, and reduces the need to travel in. And as you said, some people are not able to travel in 5 days a week. I mean, when I had my injury, this is about 17 years ago now, working from home was not an option at all. It was purely reserved for senior people, partners in the law firm. So I was expected, I had a phased return to work, but every time I went to work, there was no option to work from home, even though actually, arguably, everything can be available online. But I was expected to go into work, and then sometimes you're already exhausted before you do that journey into work. And as you say, this has been beneficial for not just disabled people, this way of working, a different way of working, home working or flexibility for people with caring responsibilities, for people, you know, who maybe just work in a different way. And I think most people, when you have a conversation, gosh, before COVID, we were traveling to work every single day.
Yeah.
What a waste of time that was. You know, so much dead time traveling, and people even without a disability have questioned, was this the most efficient way to work? So although it gives additional challenges to managers, you know, remote working, checking in with people, junior members of staff, you know, ensuring they have that close supervision and learn and don't miss out on opportunities that sometimes do arise when you're just next to someone in the office. You know, these create different challenges for managers. Overall, it has been very beneficial, particularly for the disabled community, to work in this different way.
Yeah, no, definitely. I completely agree with you. So what do you think organizations should be doing proactively rather than reactively when it comes to disability inclusion then, if we're talking about purely from like employer to candidate relationship wise?
Yeah. So as I said, what I've observed in the last 12, 13 years is that many workplaces wait until someone is struggling, or they approach their manager, before organisations actually think about accessibility or adjustments. So they're reactive rather than proactive. Again, the legally disabled research, which I mentioned before, had some great recommendations, and they said, you know, we should be asking everybody at recruitment, everybody when they have their appraisal, this question: what adjustments or access needs do you require to do this interview, to do this job, to attend this event, to attend this meeting? In other words, we don't wait until someone has outed themselves and declares they have a disability, which they have no obligation to do, by the way, legally, to declare their disability. Actually, we should be embedding that inclusivity and asking from the very outset, what access needs or adjustments do you require? What that does is it removes that special status and stigma attached just to disabled people to almost out themselves. And it says business as usual. We just ask this question and it's normalised in the organisation. And I always give this analogy, which makes people smile a bit, where when we go to events, we always ask everybody, what are your dietary requirements, don't we?
Yeah.
We don't just say, can you tell us if you're vegan? We don't out the vegans, do we?
No,
so
it's
simply,
true.
why don't we just ask everybody, what are your access needs and adjustments? Now, as a disabled person, that gives me some comfort. I think, gosh, it's not required on me to raise the issue. Can I just check, is your venue accessible? Can I just check if there's a disabled toilet? Can I just check what the agenda is? When are the breaks coming up? You know, the organisation or the person running the event have thought about inclusion and disability inclusion and adjustments from the outset. It's not required on the person to almost raise a problem. It's not a problem. It shouldn't be seen as a problem. But when you have to raise it, there's a lot of administrative burden that comes with having a disability, a lot of meticulous planning that needs to happen. But if organisations have already done the legwork and asked the question, that's one less thing for us to do. So that's what organisations can do, is ask the question, you know, how can we build an environment that already works for a wide range of people, just by asking that question.
Again, I think it comes back to whole normalising it and making it it's not something to be scared of or something to feel like, oh, it's an extra thing. No, it is. The fact is, unfortunately, it is the way the world is. There are people who are disabled. As much as we don't want that, and we don't want people who to have this kind of disability or to suffer with any kind of illness or disability, there are people who are disabled. So how can we make adjustments for them to make them feel included? And it's not that they're just added to a working system that doesn't actually work for them. Because I've always said, I've always said that I feel like with a lot of companies and a lot of businesses, diverse DEI and working with inclusion, I feel like for a lot of companies it's like a checklist tick box. It's like, okay, we've done that, we've hired someone who's disabled, or we've hired someone, and it's like, okay, you've hired someone, but then what adjustments have you made for that person to be able to work with you and work for you, which I don't think gets spoken about enough, because it's just the idea of, oh, we've ticked our DEI box, and it's like, no, there's more than that.
Yeah, well, the reality is, Nikki, disability is a human experience. You know, nearly 1 in 4 of us will experience a disability at any point in our lives. whether it's through illness, impairment, or the aging process. It's not an us and them issue, disabled people over there and people non-disabled over here. It is something that any of us can belong to, a group, if you stick around long enough. It is a human experience that most of us will experience. So, this sort of conversation, not only do we have a legal duty in organisations to make adjustments for people, it's just a common experience that people will have. Quite often organisations will say, well, we don't have any disabled people. Again, going back to the first question about, well, what is a disability? It's not just sticks and wheelchairs. The majority is not visible. Most likely people have got people living with a disability or health condition, but the environment is such that people aren't comfortable sharing it, or adjustments aren't normalised, or the culture is just not there. So it is something that we really need to grapple with in our organisations.
No, of course, 100% agree. So with that being said, then how does lived experience shape the way you now advise organisations compared to your earlier career? With that all being said.
Yeah, so when I became disabled in 2008, and then started this company, Diverse Matters, I think that combination of legal expertise and lived experience really allowed me to bridge those two worlds, helping organisations understand both their responsibilities and also the human impact behind them. I understand so deeply now what it's like to be a disabled person. So I approach this now with nuance, with empathy, with realism, and also you may have great policies in your organisation, but what you may not have is trust from your employees. You may not have genuine communication. You may not have that psychological safety where people feel able to talk about their health conditions or adjustments that they need. You may have leadership that says one thing, as you say, tick box, great mission statements, and they talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, but actually there's an incongruence. What their words are doesn't match up with the behaviours and the actions of the managers, of the leaders, and whether people actually feel genuinely included, not simply whether they've got great policies that exist on paper. So I feel that my lived experience and the fact that I was a lawyer, I can bridge those two worlds and help people really understand how to have that trust, build that communication. So it's not just something on paper and a mission statement or policies that sound great on paper, but actually the gap is culture. That's what I help organisations with, bringing my lived experience into that.
And with that then, if there was an employer listening to this, or like listening to our conversation right now, what would you say, what would be one thing that you'd want employers specifically to take away from this conversation we're having?
Yeah. Be proactive rather than reactive. Normalise conversations about disability. Embed that inclusion. Ask before meetings, are there any access needs or adjustments you require? Before events, during recruitment, so it's not seen as a special treatment or favour of disabled people. Actually, it's built in to the way you approach business, and it's embedded within that. So normalise conversations.
Yeah, I think, look, ultimately it is just kind of normalizing something to make someone feel comfortable to be able to do something just the same as everyone else can. Because that's the whole idea of inclusivity, is to make someone feel included. So to make someone feel included, you have to normalize their surroundings and make them feel like, okay, they're not just filling out a tick box list. Like I said, like they are there to also give back. So to provide a service, to provide work, to provide performance, whatever it may be, they are there to provide something. So make those adjustments for them to be able to do that. And I think that's the whole point of inclusivity. But with that, I'm a bit conscious of time just because I've had the notification come up saying that the meeting went. I'll ask one last question. So in your experience, what's the gap between the Equality Act legally, or what the Equality Act legally requires, and what inclusion looks like in like practice day to day?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say, the Equality Act provides that essential legal framework, but legal compliance alone does not automatically create inclusion. In other words, you
Okay.
sometimes have to go beyond legal compliance. What I mean by that is an organisation, and I referred to this before, can technically comply with the law, but they can still create environments where disabled people feel exhausted, they feel excluded, or they're unable to progress. And I said before, the real gap is often culture.
Yeah.
You can have a great reasonable adjustments policy, but the gap is this: if employers feel they'll be judged for using adjustments, if they feel that if they ask for an adjustment, people think they're not able to do the job, or there's some stigma attached to that, then inclusion isn't really happening in practice. So that gap is really where, I try and help organisations fill that gap with culture, making managers more confident and competent, having conversations, normalising conversations, creating psychological safety. So the gap is often culture. You can be legally compliant, but there can still be a gap in terms of how your disabled employees feel in that organisation.
No, I completely understand, and I think all these questions and everything that you've said, it kind of brings to light a different side of not just disability or work, but just everything in general. Because with your experience in law as a lawyer, it is a different incentive. It's a different way. It's a different incentive, and it's a different way of looking at things. It's a different perspective altogether, which I've found very insightful and very eye-opening, because the things that you've just mentioned, like, I didn't even know were even a thing, or were even things that would even be thought about when it comes to these kinds of things. So I'm very grateful, and I appreciate you so much for actually having this conversation with me, because if this has educated me, I hope this can educate someone else and actually bring to light things that people don't speak about, things that people don't know about. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me today, and actually taking the time to speak to me about have this conversation, have to discuss this topic. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. Thanks, Nikki.
Right, I'll let you go, because I'm sure you're very busy, and I'm just a bit conscious of the timer on the
I hope
meeting.
that was all right.
Yeah, no, everything was great. I'm gonna try and edit it, just just shorten it as much as I can.
Yeah.
But other than that, this was brilliant. This was perfect. Thank you so much.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Great questions as well. Fantastic.
No,
Thanks,
you
Nikki.
did great with answering them as well. You did great answering them.
When's it going to come out then? When do you think?
Maybe in the next few days or so, because I've got a couple more calls today about them. So I'm going to have those calls as well. So within 2 to 3 days, and then what I'll do, I'm going to tag you in, because I'm going to have it on LinkedIn and YouTube. So what I'll do, I'll tag you on LinkedIn, and then I'll let you know once it's posted on YouTube as well. But yeah, don't worry, I'll keep you in the loop with once everything's posted.
Fantastic. All right, good luck with it.
Thanks
a lot.
Bye. See you. Bye. Bye.